Hi, I'm Alex Helmbrecht, and I'm joined here with my co-host, as always, Daniel Binkard. Welcome to the FARcast. Our guest today is Dr. Matthew Brust, a professor of physical and life sciences, I suppose is the official title, but I mean, how do you introduce yourself to people who say, hey, I teach at college? What's your...
Biology professor, I
Biology
guess.
professor, okay. Well, that's
right.
good. It's always... to me, physical and life sciences sound so vague. It's almost like saying you work in college relations. You're like, well, what is that?
And
Tell
that's
me
a
more.
broader sense, because the life sciences refers to the biology side, and then the physical would be things like geoscience, chemistry, stuff like that.
Sure.
So it's kind of a bigger umbrella, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. You guys get a lot done in that soon-to-be new building.
Yeah.
Not to answer a potential question coming up.
Yeah,
I'm
gonna
looking
be good.
insanely forward to it.
Well, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
Yeah, and so actually it's kind of funny because this time of year in the fall I get to talking about how I miss edible mushroom collecting because of where I grew up. Because I actually grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee, Menominee Falls, which is, at the time it was more farms back then. Now it's mostly subdivisions. So I grew up there, and of course did a lot of fishing and stuff like that, and obviously into bugs, as you guys well know. I started that at an early age. And then it's kind of an interesting story that I went out of high school. I went to a local college for 3 years, got my associate's degree. And then it was interesting. Most of my high school years were a little rough because I did lose. When I was a freshman, I lost a younger brother to neuroblastoma cancer when he was in 8th grade, so that was rough. Then my parents divorced my senior year of high school, and so it was a lot of ideas that I had that I wanted to do for a career, but then my grades weren't as good because of those stresses, and so I got my associate's degree, and then I was working school full-time. I actually dropped out of college for 7 years, and so I spent 7 years in the machining industry, so I was a foreman for a while. And it's kind of interesting because, that's helped me a lot because... I kind of always, I never want to be an administrator, but I also understand how they think because, I understand how business works. And so that was a really nice background to have, but it also taught me a lot of good time management skills because I not only had to, when I was a foreman, not on my own time, but I had to manage my employees' time and stuff like that. So that taught me a lot of good lessons in life. And so I did a lot of maturing over the 7 years, but I got to this crossroads of, I'll say this about the machining industry. For a person that's relatively smart, it does get to be very boring and monotonous. The money's all good, but... So I got to this crossroads of life. I remember I got laid off from the one place because the Asian market collapsed. And so I had the summer off collecting unemployment, and I got to think about, I'd really like to go back to school. So I got that set up, and I did my undergrad, finished up my undergrad at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, which had a really good natural resources biology program. So did that in 3 more years, and then that wasn't that bad. Took a semester off. Trying to figure out what to do. I wanted to study insects, and so the trade-off, anybody thinking about grad school is you got 2 ideas. Is you can either just try to find, I want to study this, but then you might be stuck with an advisor you don't like. So I was more concerned about, I want to study what I want. Can I find an advisor that's up my alley? So I did a lot of looking up online, phone calls, because sometimes what it says on their webpage and what they actually study aren't the same thing. And I just happened to hook up with Dr. Holbach, who was at Kearney at the time. And he's kind of a jack of many trades. And I still co-author papers with him all the time. I work with him a lot. And so I did my master's in Kearney in biology with an emphasis in entomology. Took another semester off, did my PhD in Lincoln, and then I wound up here. And so, and I like Nebraska. One of the things I do miss some things in Wisconsin, like, again, edible mushroom foraging and stuff like that. But I don't miss the humidity. But I'm not so much of a people person. I don't miss the city. And so that's one of the things I love about Chadron is I go back to Milwaukee, and that traffic just stresses me out. Living in Lincoln, for instance, you guys have been there.
Yeah.
I do not like traffic.
Yeah, we're a bit quieter here. So, Matt, you've now been at CSC for, it's been probably 10 years or more than 10 years.
16,
Getting it
something
there.
Like that. Yeah, I got my 15-year thing last year, I think.
There we go.
I lose track. You know how it is at our age. You got to remember what year you were born to figure out what old am I.
Well, what are some of the changes that you've experienced here over the 15 years now?
Oh, gosh. It's amazing, really. I mean, some of the people that have come and gone, that have impacted me. Like one, I was just thinking in math that it's such an unfortunate thing. I never had a chance to get to know him, but I heard so many great things about him was Monty Fickle.
Yeah.
And I just met him that first year. Ron Whedon was another one. I just missed that guy. He was something else. And so a lot of the way that we did things back then, the technology is just incredible how it's changed. Some good, some bad. I look back at the way how, I haven't, and I'm sure you guys do this, think back of how did we manage to teach back then?
It does seem kind of strange, back to the processes that we had.
Yeah, we're getting older.
Blackboard and stuff like that. And, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the changes have been subtle. But at the same time, again, at a small college, before this, we were talking about, when I took that biological illustration courses, being a small school, how one professor has such a big impact. Like we were talking about Dr. Bird back in art department.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just such a neat guy, but he was such a unique, taught classes that everybody loved, and you can't find anybody that teaches those classes hardly anymore.
Yeah, some of those changes get to be difficult.
And so I've seen a lot of that. So a lot of people come and go, administrative changes. But at the same time, I would say the overall sense of what CSC is, I don't think it's changed at all. I mean, we're still very strong community-oriented college that we seem to balance two things really well. And I'll say I always constantly am reviewing this in my head. How do I do this the best, especially with freshman courses, is to provide a high-quality education while still accepting the fact that we're an open enrollment college. And that's a tough thing to balance because, we want to help every student be successful. And there are unfortunately some that can't make it, but it requires us to put on a lot of our own extra time. But I think we're a unique bunch of people here that are willing to do it. I mean, I'll admit, if I just wanted to work 40 hours a week, I'd go back to machining.
Right.
But, what was I doing? Making my boss happy. I don't mind working, 60, 70, sometimes even 80, 90 hours a week because I like what I do. And the summers, I mean, I don't have to do research. That's when I do it. But, I can't complain about the fact that I get summers off and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And but you look back in the people we train. I was just telling somebody about, you guys probably remember Garrett Gilkey and his story. Sure. He's just such a neat story. Pre-hop, our pre-med, want to play in the NFL. Now he's a highly successful businessman. I mean, so many stories like that out of this school. So I think while a lot of smaller things have changed, what CSC is all about, I don't think it's changed a bit.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Maybe one of the biggest changes that I think people at least physically see is the large tangible building of the math science.
Yeah, it's just so overdue. I mean, it's kind of funny. I was joking. I got fish that are in my basement now, tanks that I'm looking so forward to putting back in my lab because they don't like being in my basement. Some of these are native species that are, some were like 7 years old. My students loved them. It was nice, just something to make a relaxing atmosphere in the lab and stuff like that. So having our own room because I don't know if that's that question yet, but sort of how has it been teaching in that building?
Oh yeah, no, it's it's kind of a two-part question. How excited are you and your colleagues to actually teach in that building beginning hopefully next fall?
Yep.
I think everything's still on schedule. And then how's that going to impact student learning? How's it going to impact the region?
That's kind of an interesting question because I think the first part is easy to answer. I think every one of us is looking so forward to it. I mean, we've gotten kind of used to the building, but there's so many things. It's been so hard, because I usually have my own lab. Now we're having 4 different classes sharing a lab space, and it's very difficult, like students with athletics trying to make things up. I mean, like for instance, today I normally have specimens on the lab for my zoology students to study for their lab exam next week, but because that room is being used 5 days a week, I can't do that. So I had to email my students last week and tell them, I wish I could, but, so if you guys can do Quizlets or something like that, whatever works for you guys.
And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't know that if you'd seen them before, but Daniel and I were involved with a video shoot when an agency was out here, and we actually shot some scenes inside one of those temporary labs. And I just want to commend you and the other faculty who use those spaces. I mean, they're certainly usable spaces, but it's not a lab. It's not the same as what they're getting. So
but at the same
just
time,
wanted to
I will
commend you
also
on that.
say that the students we get, I think you get just some wonderful students that are understanding of that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of them too already know that we're getting a new building next year, so we just got to sit out this one more semester yet.
Yeah, it's like the wait before Christmas.
And the problem is you're exactly right, because that's the way I'm feeling. I'm like, one more semester of this. And so, but yeah, we're looking so forward to it. Now, as far as the impact, I'm one of those people being a scientist. I just don't like to try to make predictions. I know people love when us scientists do it, and then they get mad at us when we're wrong. We're wrong like half the time. I won't deny that, but that's just part of the beast. But I think the potential is going to be huge because one of the biggest problems we've had in the old building is just not enough space. And when you're limited in space, that limits so many other things. And now the technology, that's another place where we are getting some. I mean, there's some I wish we could afford, but I think that's going to be a big thing. But if you don't have the space, where are you going to put this new technology anyway? So, I know a lot of people tell me they think it's going to be a huge game changer. You could always say I'm a little more of a cynic or a pessimist. I think it'll be a game changer. It's just, I'm on the fence and trying to predict how much so. I'm one of those people that just, I don't know. I mean,
There's always
hope
more
for the best.
more to have. And I remember walking through that building after they had cleared most of the stuff out and getting ready for demolition of those interior spaces, and just
threw a
how
lot of
much
stuff out.
how much had been stuffed into that place.
Yeah.
And it's like seemed bigger on the inside than it looks on the outside, and still stuffed to the gills.
And if you know anything about scientists, we're pack rats.
You got to be pack rat. Well, that's maybe a good segue to our next question.
We are. I'm as guilty as anybody.
Your teaching areas, Matt, which, let's see the list here: zoology, entomology, ornithology, all the ologies, or at least
Just
a bunch of
about.
the ologies. So for
Geology,
non-science,
paleontology.
yeah, we'll throw those. But for
I
your
know
teaching
a bit about
areas,
both those areas, especially some geoscience. I've had a couple of courses in that area too.
Oh, yeah.
I just wouldn't teach them, but
so for non-scientists in the audience, how would you describe the areas that you teach? What's the layman's perspective?
okay.
on
So
that?
some of those, like ornithology, is a really fun course for. I think just about anybody would love a course like that. It's basically bird biology.
Love birds,
and it's just
yeah.
a fun course. I mean, one of the neatest things, you learn calls and you learn a lot about their just life habits, things like that. And birds are just such neat organisms.
Mm-hmm.
So ornith refers to birds. Limnology is one I teach. It's basically aquatic ecosystems.
Okay.
Now I insert a little bit of ichthyology, so basically fish in there, because who doesn't love fish? And and there's a lot of demand for fisheries biologists if you have at least some background. Even if you're just going to be a technician with game and parks, knowing a bit about fish is pretty important.
Oh, yeah.
And then entomology, that's my main forte, is insects. So ento, which is often referred with, what is the other one?
Etymologists
Yeah.
studying entomology.
It's always funny getting those mixed up. And then parasitology, obviously parasites. That's not really my favorite. It grosses people out. But the world is just ruled by parasites, sadly.
It does
I hate
seem to
say
be
it.
sometimes, doesn't
Even
it?
human society, sadly, sometimes it is.
What's like the definition between when does something no longer studied in entomology and becomes parasitology?
Well, there's actually quite a bit of overlap.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I had a whole lecture on parasitic insects in my entomology course, because you just can't get around that. When you look at like mosquito-borne diseases,
Yeah,
like
that's true.
stuff like that. So there is a lot of overlap, and that's one of the great. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things in science is there is a lot of overlap in certain
Sure.
things where certain things just fit more than one category. So whereas entomology, I've covered all. In fact, my entomology course, we cover some really fun topics like insects as food. I actually went to labs, the students dig through like flour, and they got to quantify little insect body parts they find under a scope, and it kind of grosses them out, because there are some. I mean, unfortunately, never close to threshold where they'd reject
And then
it,
you have
but-
them make cookies afterwards.
well, I haven't done that, but still. But they do some things like that. It just the impact in society and things like that, because it's just one of those courses that lends itself really good to that. And then like zoology is my main freshman course, and that's basically zoo meaning animals. And so basically it's an animal biology course. I also teach a course that I kind of inherited because of somebody leaving, that again, it's just a fascinating course to teach. It's comparative anatomy and physiology. Okay. So it's basically just all the vertebrates, and we march up comparing, different derivations in the anatomy and the different functionality, and that I love teaching that course. That is just such a cool form and function course. And it really helps you understand our own bodies and sort of like one of the fun things. It's always fun to talk about how muscle works and how you can beat a guy twice your size in an arm wrestle if you understand the mechanics of musculature at the cellular level. That's kind of cool. And just stuff like that. There's so many cool courses and things in that course.
Absolutely.
So and sorry to go back to the parasites, but it's just a fun word to say. But
Parasites.
why do they exist? What's the reason?
Okay, well it's funny, because that's the question I always get is people. I think we as humans, we have this anthropocentric view, thinking everything needs to have a purpose. And the problem is, from an evolutionary standpoint, a lot of things exist because they can. They haven't gone extinct. And in fact, parasites, it makes sense. In fact, some estimates now are, although beetles are currently considered the most diverse insects, it's estimated that as many as 10 times as many parasitic wasp species exist than we've discovered. And the reason for that is, if you think of everything in ecology, it's just energy flow. And by being a parasite, you save energy. Basically, you don't have to find your food. You can scarf it. In the humans, like I always use a classic example of, the person, when I was a machinist, always borrows a cigarette from me. You never get one back. And they just take and they get, and in the biological world, it's the same way. Because then they can use that savings and dump it into more reproduction, so they're more likely to not go extinct. So this idea, and some of these do, even ticks. I mean, you could say, well, what do good do ticks do? Well, turkeys love eating them. I mean, turkeys eat lots of ticks, thankfully. But
We love them for it.
Now, tapeworms, I've never figured out a purpose for tapeworms, but they're that same thing. They exist kind of because they've managed to be there. I mean, you can't get rid of the darn things.
Ticks are the one that they just give me the heebie-jeebies.
And they're dangerous.
Yeah.
There's several dangerous diseases around. I mean, you hear a lot about Lyme disease, but in this part of the country, really the scary one is Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Right.
Yep.
Just in my time, I know 3 of our former students that have had it.
Yeah.
And they all have permanent damage from it. And
Yeah, it's not good.
it's not a common one, but you just never know, and it can kill you.
Yep. So maybe a more fun topic. You have some interests in photography, and you told me this specifically on the sidewalk one time in citizen science dealing with entomology. Talk a little bit about that.
So I've been into photography since I was a little kid. I mean, I had the little pocket Polaroid cameras, and of course I remember the old days. You spend a fortune just trying to get a lightning strike because you had to buy a roll of film.
Oh no, you went down that rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, I wasted a lot of money trying to get a good lightning strike.
Oh yeah.
And you poor, $5 an hour job back in the day. But I got into it, and I've gotten really good at it, actually. I don't want to toot my own horn, but, and it's funny because I get these insect photos I take that end up sometimes in textbooks. What people don't realize, I do this all with a little pocket-sized point and shoot, because some of those are actually pretty darn good if you know how to operate them. I mean, I know you use those big cameras.
No, that's the advantage of that small format, more depth of field.
Yep, exactly.
It's very nice
Because
to
the
have
other
that.
thing you don't realize with those big telephotos, like you can do, but you got that problem of shake. That's why you have to have a tripod.
Yeah.
With these pocket-sized ones, I can get close enough that I stay a little bit out to maintain my depth of field, but the shake issue is not as bad at that short distance. It's sort of less, I guess you could say, static in between. And so I can get nice, crisp, clear shots with just these cheap little cameras. In fact, I buy them used on eBay.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think
yeah,
I've spent
it's not too bad.
$150 on a camera in 10 years.
You have a few point and clicks.
Point and shoots?
Yeah, point
Point
shoots.
shoots. Yeah, and especially being able to get them used.
Yep,
Yeah.
and because
If you can buy
the
'em
reason
used,
I
go
buy the
for
old
it.
ones is I don't like those charger batteries. I still like to use AA's.
Oh, you're going really old school.
Oh
with
yeah,
it in
I
digital
like
terms.
90s
Yeah.
technology, man. Early 2000s. They made these newer. I don't like the newer point and shoots, the pocket size ones. The bigger ones, the SLRs are nice, but the little ones, I think they've gone backwards. And most of them aren't as good at macro anyway, which is what I mostly do.
We're always trying to strike that balance.
Yeah, and you nailed it when you said it's depth of field, because to me that's everything.
Yeah.
I can approach a lot of insects within 10 inches. Nobody else can. In fact, fun one I do for grasshoppers, I actually tire them out. You don't think you can do it? You can tire out a grasshopper a lot more easily. And then if you can actually get them to crawl on your finger for a little bit. They're angry when you do it, but
How do you tire a grasshopper out?
I could get into it. It's a little like, but they don't have the endurance.
I'm just thinking of like a battery of exercises that they have to do.
Pretty
like,
much,
run
if they jump
a
about
little
6 to
treadmill.
8 times in rapid succession, they lose the oomph in the hind legs. They can't jump that many times in a row without getting tired.
This is how humans evolve. We just keep chasing them down.
Well, and actually there's truth to that, because if you think about it, in Africa, our ancestors, that's one of the things of why we're able to hunt a lot of the big game, like even deer. They can run faster than us, but really, especially in spring, you can outdistance a deer on foot. You just keep walking, and eventually you'll tire them out.
Yeah. We're tenacious like that.
Yeah, we are. We have great long-term. And so, and grasshoppers don't have that, actually. It's kind of funny. So, but yeah, and so there's that. So the photography, and I just like doing it as a hobby and providing resources so people can, like I would eventually like to redo the Grasshoppers Nebraska book. But I'd actually prefer to use live photos for that, because you get some discoloration, which is the opposite of bird field guides. Because bird field guides, you're actually better to have a painting because you never get them at the perfect angle. Whereas insects, you kind of
Oh,
can.
yeah. Shade and sunlight. and
Which
all
is
that.
actually perfect drawing to go to your citizen science thing, because that involves, a lot of it's involving photography now. So one of the problems we have is I'm mostly a conservation biologist. I still work a lot with my home state of Wisconsin, out here in Nebraska with Nebraska Game and Parks. And one of the things we're running into is there are not many entomologists like me out there. In fact, there's very few. There's very few, plant identifiers like Steve Ralsmeyer, and we're getting old. And but the problem is, it's not about just us anymore. It used to be, I like to say, as you well know, is photography used to be a rich person sport. That's not the case anymore. The average person can get excellent photos, and with these iPhones and things like that, you can have GPS data, it records the date, and as an insect collector that puts things in a collection in a museum, to me, the only real important data is what is it, where did I find it, when did I collect it, and who caught it? You can associate that all with an image. And so with citizen science, so what we're trying to do, and I know Wisconsin, they're really pushing me on this, is we know there's a lot of data we could get on these things, but with just me, I can't do it all. But with these little cameras, people, they don't have to know what they photograph. There's so many naturalists out there that just like being out there and photographing stuff, but they don't know what it is. And some of them are willing to learn, but some of them it takes a lot of time, and so it could be a little overwhelming. But a lot of them are willing to just have fun shooting photos and submit them, and we can do the identification. But the nice thing is then when they submit them, we have those data associated, so we can say, wow, this is new for that county,
right,
and things like that. Now, the full circle part of that is, well, why are those data important? Is because one of the things is, if it's a rare species, for one, we can now get a better handle on where they are and where they're not. And then we can determine, are they as rare as they thought, or maybe they are. The second one is, for instance, how do we know if the world has changed? So one of the things people ask, well, how do we know global warming is occurring? Well, on the one hand, we can say direct evidence. Well, you look at the temperatures, yes, especially in the last about 50 years. And then there's indirect glacial melting. But one of those things, we're seeing it in the wildlife too. Like there's, butterflies. Just in my lifetime, there's a number of butterflies that I've literally seen recede about 1,200 feet in elevation here in the West just in my lifetime. I can't find them at elevations I used to. Okay. There's several butterflies that have virtually disappeared from the whole Nebraska panhandle just in the last 30 years for totally unknown reasons. And so the question of, well, how do we know they disappeared? Well, if we have baseline data that we're here, they were here, and we can say, well, we were sampling, nobody's seeing them, we can pretty confidently say, well, they're not here anymore. And, several bumblebees. Bumblebees are a big area that, again, the western bumblebee, Randy Lawson before me, he's got quite a few specimens he collected around here in the 1980s. Nobody's seen them since. So again, so it's a bit of, so there's conservation, there's evidence that, what are things changing on us, what can we do about it? And so the citizen science part is, now one thing I am going back to photography for the citizen science, so I just made a thing for lady beetles, basically ladybugs for Nebraska game and parks. Now it's not going to be public for another year. I'm just putting it, I'll say that we're working on something like that, so if anybody knows that, I don't care, because it's something to look forward to. But one of the things that I got one going for, we already have one for tiger beetles in Wisconsin we're working on, and we're doing these through iNaturalist, which is a website again. And so we're working on one for grasshoppers, but what I'm doing on the loading page is I'm having a description and examples, because one of the things that is important to us is there's certain angles you want to get to be able to do the identification. So yes, it's nice people just take photos, but if you have the chance, for grasshoppers, for instance, if you can get a perfect side profile view and a dorsal view, those two I can identify just about anything. Ladybugs, you really need three angles. You want kind of a face shot, a back shot, and a side shot. But you get those three, I can pretty much identify most of them. And so once again, if people are aware of that, then they can decisively try to. And I think for the citizen, it's kind of fulfilling, because 20 years ago, the average citizen couldn't contribute much to science. Yeah. Now I think, I can't say this for sure because I'm not a non-scientist, but I'm sure that's got to be kind of fulfilling in a way to be able to say, wow, that's cool. I found something rare. In fact, I get to tell there's a person at Game and Parks who I think she felt pretty tickled when she knew she found a rare lady beetle, and she sent me the photo for identification, only to have me tell her it was something far more rare than she even thought. In fact, it was the third record for the whole state ever. Wow. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, and that's kind of cool. I think that kind of makes people want to do it more.
Absolutely.
So Matt, what goes into specimen collecting? I know you're on the grasshopper side for sure. But
and I do tiger beetles, cicadas, butterflies.
Right. What goes into that? Collecting the specimens, storing them, displaying them, and of course, why is it so important to have these specimens?
Which we already talked about that last part. But so a lot of it depends on the organism you're after. Like grasshoppers, I can catch them by hand with a net. For USDA, I actually do Kansas and Nebraska. I go through their sweep net samples. So that's where you just sweep the net around and so you get a random picture of just what's in the pasture. Right. And we do that to kind of estimate probability of outbreaks and stuff like that. But then other things, there's certain things you catch by hand. There's even ways of trapping insects, so you can put out a black light and then they get in the bucket. So there depends on the insect what you do. There's a number of pitfall traps work for ground dwelling and nocturnal things pretty good. So, and I think that's the fun part, because I'll often do that while I'm photographing. And sometimes I miss an opportunity where I'll try to photograph them first and then they get away on me. Something rare. But in fact, the second specimen of that ladybug I just talked about, I have the second record for the state, but I never caught it. I got some really nice photos, and then it flew away. At least I've got nice photos.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so sometimes that happens. And then the second part, so the collecting can vary. There's also the storage before you actually, so some things I can just throw in alcohol until then. Some things will discolor, so I always have dead stuff in my freezer, sadly, and little dead stuff.
These things happen.
And then the curation part gets tricky because that's, again, we put a pin through it, like insects. The nice thing about insects is because their exoskeleton is mostly a carbohydrate protein mixture, and the carbohydrate that they have predominantly is chitin, and not many things can digest that, is if you dry a specimen and you keep it out of bright sunlight and you keep it in low humidity and you protect it from other insects that want to eat them, they'll stay in the very position you dried them in for 200-300 years. They might fade a bit. I mean, the British National Heritage, the Natural History Museum. I mean, these aren't the ones they have on display, but there's specimens back there that pretty much go all the way to the time of Carolus Linnaeus and back before that, early 1800s, late 1700s. Yeah. I mean, they're a bit faded now, even though they've been in darkness. But
so are there ethical considerations with insects?
It's changing. Now, years ago, that's the thing. For vertebrates, you got all these. That's why I don't work much with vertebrates, because you got paperwork. Now, if it's an endangered species, like for instance, there's things I have to get a permit if I'm going to collect an endangered species, which are hard to get. I just don't. I'll photograph them and stuff, but I don't. Whereas Dr. Hoback I work with, he does the American burying beetle, so he has permits every year for that. So I'd fall under his umbrella when I'm working with him. But then there's also things have changed, because in the old days, people, didn't really care about bugs. I mean, they killed them in their garden all the time. But things have changed to where now we're seeing a lot more, and this is a good thing, that a lot more people are getting concerned of, we should protect these butterflies, we shouldn't kill any. And it's got to be kind of, it frustrates me once in a while, because there are kind of a league of people now that are saying, you should never kill a butterfly, and da-da-da. But the problem is a lot of those people don't realize that some of these species are very hard to ID, to the point where some of them, you literally, I know of some lady beetles, you literally have to extract the internal genitalia and examine them under a dissection scope to identify them positively to species. And so that some people don't realize the diversity out there. There's that many species that look. Grasshoppers are a nightmare. I'm probably the only person in the state by far that can identify pretty much everything in the state, because it's taken me many years to get to that level.
Yeah, it would.
And
certainly.
so now the good news, there's also the thing of, if you collect, your likelihood of wiping out a species by over-collecting is pretty low in most cases. I mean, I'm capable of it in some cases, just like a poacher would be, but I have to go about it, and I try to make sure never remove more than 20% of what I see at that site. But for endangered species, it does get different. And unfortunately, there is a black market for even endangered insects.
Of course.
And so then they could deplete those. So ethically, again, I'm glad people are starting to bring that up, because the other drawback is if more people do it. So these little, 4-H insect collections and what I do in my class probably isn't going to have an impact. But the people that collect insects should only be really those people that need to. Because if everybody and their brother does it for a hobby, this is probably going to have an impact after a while.
Right.
So that's interesting. So this might be kind of a silly question, but to me, a lot of insects of the same species look alike, almost identical, like you mentioned. We're humans, all three of, at least I think we are, and all three of us.
When in doubt, always assume aliens. We just had that funny conversation. It never turns out to be aliens.
But all three of us look different. Why is that?
Well, it's because of our own perception. Because we have a reason to be able to tell each other apart. Believe it or not, when you really look at these things, they can tell each other apart. I watch the way grasshoppers are quite social animals. When you look at their interactions, these males will try to intimidate the hell out of each other and things like that. And they clearly recognize, in fact, so if you look at them, you'll start to notice, I pin enough of them, and it's funny because there's a lot of specimens, individual specimens. I have almost 10,000 grasshoppers in the collection. Probably at least half of them, I can remember catching that actual specimen.
Wow.
Just because there's little subtle things, and then again, it's because, I've learned to recognize those differences. They can. One of the neatest things, and this is kind of cool, there's a couple of studies that show this, and I think that's just fascinating, that there was a recent study, so bandwing grasshoppers, the ones you see with the colorful wings, are often kind of earth-colored. They clearly know what they look like. And we're finding they tend to gravitate towards soils that match their own color. Even after they're attracted to a light at night, they'll go back to these places that they blend into. So they seem to be self-aware of what they look like, which is also kind of cool. So that takes that to a whole new level.
Yeah.
But I think it's just because we are able to identify what we need to. We just learn to tell features apart. You know, again, probably because I'm a specialist in this, my ornithology class. You know, my students, I learn to know my bird calls. And it's funny because I can be in a pasture and hear two male western meadowlarks. And to me, each individual sounds slightly different. You know, it's like, well, he sounds, that part of the note's a little different on that guy than this guy.
Yeah.
And that's just individual birds in the same pasture. So I think it's just sort of a thing that, you get used to. You only have to tell each other apart. But the more you work with these things, you start to notice, okay, and then you get these weird ones with cool stripe that nobody you've never seen on them. And
There we go.
Yeah, that's
kind of like if you remember the movie Gremlins.
sure.
They all had their
Gizmo,
characteristics. So aside from identifying grasshoppers, Matt, any other hobbies that you'd like to share with us?
Oh gosh, I have a lot of them. I actually, I'm not a geologist, but I do collect rocks, especially agates. On eBay I tumble them and I hunt them locally. So I kind of collect coins, old coins, but I'm not active. If I find something rare, I've never sold any of them. I just got tons of stuff in a safe. Let's see, another big one. I fish a fair amount. Yeah. I mean, I do pretty good whenever I go, but I only find so much time for that. And then trying to think of other thing. For a while there during the pandemic, I got into fishing lure making, which was kind of fun. I was painting them, and now I got this back stock. Yeah. But now I haven't had time for that because I know Justin Hagg wanted to do a story about it, and I don't want to say I kind of avoided him a little bit, but I was just kind of self-conscious because I didn't think I was that good at it. My lures were pretty cool, but then he wanted to do a story how I do it, and I'm like, well, I haven't done it in a while now anyway. It's just kind of one of those passes. And I got so many of them now. I made more lures than I'm going to use in 20 years. So
yeah.
They were quick to make, and it's kind of cool because you can buy these lure bodies and hooks dirt cheap, and you can make them and paint them for a quarter of the price you're going to pay at somewhere like Binkard. So and it was just kind of a fun hobby to pet, like you said, pass the time during the pandemic when you're stuck in your house early in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Going mad for a month.
Yeah. Didn't know what was coming next.
But so there's that. I'm trying to think. I just have a lot of hobbies. I mean, the photography is a big one. It's amazing how many. I just looked the other day on Flickr. I think I'm at like 16,000 photos on Flickr.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which is crazy because they go under. I mean, a lot of those metadata I don't really have. I mean,
you got them backed up, right?
I don't know. I mean,
I've got to check that.
Because the photos I have on other flash drives, but all the text associated with them, I don't know. As my younger years, I just never saw the importance of recording the date all the time. I mean, I did in some of my younger photos. Like my little sister was kind of funny. I just posted a photo on Facebook that she thought was so funny. It was that 100. So she was probably all of like 4 years old. And I planted a bunch of Atlantic giants, and I actually grew her plant. This was going to be her plant. And she got like 156 pumpkins, so I have an old picture, and I actually did put the date on it. And it's almost as tall as she is, and she's got her hand on it.
Nice.
And now, of course, she's, well into her 30s. So it's like, yeah, that was you back then. You grew this beast.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and then for a while, I just didn't date my photos as well as I should have with a location. But now I'm strict about that. So yeah, I don't know how you back that up when it's all on Flickr, and I don't know that they do, but I don't know that you download it from there either.
Also created a pollinator paradise in your yard.
Yeah, that's one of those things again. And it's funny because, so me being the naturalist I am, I always, periodically I ask, well, what is the purpose of a lawn? I mean, partially it's to keep from tracking dirt in and stuff like that, but it's like, I don't see much reason to have a lawn, and I don't like mowing it. And so, as you know, my yard's a pollinator paradise. I've got garden all over. I got more asparagus than I know what to do with, and it keeps getting thicker every year. So, you can never have too much asparagus.
Sure,
because it's not easy to grow.
Pickle it. It's good for it's good in red beer.
Yeah, did I give you some of it?
No, not pickled.
Oh, I got to give you a jar.
Oh, yeah.
It's good stuff. And asparagus I love because once you get it established, and I got so many fruit trees. I got currants. I've got you name it. Just because I don't know. Again, to me, I always got to be doing something. There's got to be productive, and it's like, lawn to me is just a lawn. It's something you got to maintain. And me, some people are proud of their lawns. I'm not that person. And so, but again, I love the pollinators, and the nice thing I do, as you probably noticed, I got mostly perennials. Because out here, you got to outcompete the weeds, field bindweed, and so I get these perennials that eventually just take over. And so, the bees love it. I mean, I know I get people jealous because people, I don't see any honeybees in my yard. And it's like, I got like 200.
Wow, know where they went now.
Dragging them all away.
So,
Well, Matt, we've reached that time during the interview where we have 5 quick questions for you. So
yes.
the first thing that comes to mind, what's a favorite movie of yours?
And I thought about that for quite a while. I thought, this is going to be a fun one. So at first I was torn between Spaceballs and the original Blues Brothers, but I
Two
will
classics.
say the Blues Brothers hands down for so many reasons.
Yeah.
I mean that, I grew up on that movie, and it just, you look back, I've seen countless movies since, and just everything about that movie, it was, a lot of people don't see it as a musical. But it was way more than a musical. It was a musical and then so much. And so people forget about the fact that it was not only an excellent musical, and I mean, there's just so many funny scenes. I mean, the one I was telling my students about, I forget, it was an after-class conference, and I was talking about the shopping mall chase.
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole idea. And then you hear about the backstory, because I didn't realize, I was watching a documentary on it, that Dan Aykroyd wrote the original story himself. And then the producer just did a wonderful job. But the music, I mean, you look at the artists in there. And I mean, it's just a fun movie.
Yeah, it really is.
And so, and I look at any other movie and it's just, other movies are great for different reasons. And like I said, Spaceballs, again, there's so many classic lines. But even Spaceballs, I mean, Mel Gibson, the guy's a heck of a writer. But he still doesn't have the dynamics that Blues Brothers has.
Sure.
The original. I mean, there's just so much. The more you watch that movie, it's just such a rich movie in so many ways.
Oh, yeah, that's a good answer.
But like I said, I thought about it for a while, and I'm like, the more I thought about it, I'm like, there's nothing comes close to the Blues Brothers. No, the second one, obviously, they never should have even done the second one.
No,
as
probably
far as
not.
I'm concerned,
That was
but-
abomination.
Matt, what's a hidden talent of yours?
Oh gosh, I have a number of weird ones, I guess. I can whistle and hum at the same time, but I'm not as good at changing notes on both simultaneously, which is probably hard on my vocal cords sometimes. But yeah, it's kind of funny.
Oh, that's a different skill.
Yeah, I do it when I'm driving sometimes. You could produce some cool sounds, because I'm always jealous of birds, because birds have 2 sides operate, so birds can normally make 2 sounds at once.
Okay.
And I don't know where I learned to do it,
Yeah.
There we go.
You can, I just did it on purpose, so
Sounded
it's
like
not
a-
real controlled, but
It sounded like that World
you can do it
Cup
really loud though.
didgeridoo or
When
something.
you're,
yeah.
if you get relaxed, you can do it quite loud and accurately. But it's hard to change notes on both simultaneously, because it's kind of like doing 2 things with both hands at once. It's something.
Yeah.
It's just kind of fun when you're driving, because I'm one of those people I'll drive 800 miles on a trip and just something to keep the sanity on the trip.
Sure, yeah, you got to do it.
Come up with new rhythms and stuff like that.
The album's coming soon, I'm sure.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I do lyric writing just on the side for fun. In fact, that whole thing on and so people listening will find this funny, and it might be helpful advice if anybody's going to be having kids soon. Was the whole joke I had: if you name your son, give him the middle name Scott. Be very careful, because depending on what your last name is. They could be so I actually am working on a song about kind of a joking one. A couple of people had the middle name Scott. There were a couple of cattle rustlers, and
Nice.
last name's Worms, and the other one's like last name Warts. And
Someone's got worms, someone's got warts.
That's right.
But the problem is, to do it, I got to have 2 different storylines going simultaneously. So I never wrote a set of lyrics that complicated, because normally you just have one storyline. And
Yeah.
I've never done anything with those lyrics, because I'm not a musician, unfortunately. But although my 3 nephews on my dad, my older brother are actually all musicians. I just never went that route for some reason.
Great talent. So think back to the time when you were a college student. What's the best advice you received?
Gosh, there were a lot of them. One of the biggest ones, I think, was just, sort of just, you can do it. I mean, and I think this generation needs to hear that more, and that, don't get down on yourself. This sort of thing happens to everything. There's these general sayings, because, and especially this generation, because they don't have the confidence of my generation, where it's just sort of rub a little dirt on it, so to speak, and you're fine. But, and so, because I look back, and, when I went back and did my undergrad after those 7 years, I remember Dr. Bob Rosenfield. He was teaching the ecology, the ornithology. I took a raptor ecology course from him, and I came back as a non-trad. But I was really worried. I'm like, gosh, am I master's material, my PhD material? And he's like, you'll do fine. And just to hear those words alone, you'll do fine, from, because even at that age, I look at professors as sort of, I'm not worthy, and I'm sure students look at us that way. I'm sure my freshmen walk in my classroom scared to death of me. I mean, now they by this point in the semester, but to hear those words from somebody who's a well-known ornithologist, and so just those words were so reassuring of, okay, if he says I can do it, I can do this, you know? And so things like that. And I think even other professors, other teachers, and I think people that are listening that are teachers know that just a few little words to a student that's struggling can go so far. I mean, just that little reassurance of you can do this. I mean, it won't be easy, but you can get through this. And, you know, I went through this kind of thing. And I think sometimes that's the other part is to admit that you went through this too.
Yeah.
I think that because, you know, our growing up was different, but I look at my student struggles. I had a lot of those same struggles. You know, I even battled a little bit of anxiety when I was a student, quite a bit of it. I didn't have test anxiety, but I had a lot of other anxiety, and that's just normal. You just get through it. Just don't freak out and overwhelm yourself. And, you know, if you have problems, you know, feel free to shoot me an email if you need clarification or something like that. I mean, that's, I think, the kind of school we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and students, I think, is don't be afraid of your professors. I mean, yeah, some of them are less approachable than others, but, you know, we have a PhD, but in the end, we're still people. We were once just like you.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest part, I will say, though, not as advice for students, but I will, an admission, and my zoology students have heard this from me, and I think it's some students, it's worth it them to hear, because it's an admission of our struggles as teachers. One of the things I found, and there's a psychological phenomenon called the Dunning-Kruger effect that explains a lot of this, but the longer we are a teacher and we're an expert in our field, the problem is we get a better and better handle on what we don't know, but we don't realize how good at what we are at what we do. And so the mistake we make is we tend to think that things that are easy for us are easy for everybody. So when I assign a writing assignment to my students that I could do in an hour, I got to remind myself, you know, it's probably going to take a freshman 10 hours to do this. But it's easy to mistakenly say, oh, they should be able to do it maybe twice the time. But you got to keep thinking back, what was I like at that age? And it is hard. I'll admit to the students right now, the older I get, the harder it is. And I got to keep reflecting on, okay, if I was a freshman, think back to when I was like less than half the age I am now and how little I knew and I thought I was smart, you know? And so, but yeah, it's basically an admission to students that we try our best, but it's not easy, and I don't think it ever is, and that's just part of teaching. The better you get at what you do, ironically, the harder it is to actually teach it.
Well, I'm glad you at least recognize it and critically reflect.
Oh, yeah. So what is your favorite place on campus?
Oh, gosh. Sea Hill.
Well, Sea Hill's always a good
actually,
one.
Briggs Pond, too. Although the science building will probably become the new one, because I do miss the old building.
Yeah.
You know, all the collections in place.
Yeah,
and
it
absolutely.
And we just had space, and now we're going to have so much more space.
Yeah.
And I will admit, there's just so many good memories in there. Like I said, when I brought up, you know, Monty Fickle and Ron Whedon, I mean, to me, their spirit is like part of that building.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, everything I knew about them was pretty much there.
Yeah. That's why I'm glad we're not
preserved
losing the
that
building.
much of the building we did, yeah.
We renovate it, but we add to it, but the spirit is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, you just look at the history of this school, the amazing people we've, you know, some of my own advisees, they look where they are, and some of them become more than that's one of the funny things. If I reflect back on when I was a machinist, I worked with a lot of interesting people, so to speak, in those ways. And one of the things I always got frustrated by were these, you know, I had one foreman in one place who was clearly one of these people that never wanted to have to work harder than he did. And so he never wanted you to learn as much as he knew, because then you were a threat to his position. And there are people like that out in the workplace. But I just think that's so unfair. And so my view is, you know, what my philosophy is, I want my students to become more than I ever could be. Because really they're the next generation that's going to have to, unfortunately, eventually take care of us, so to speak. So, you know, and I don't know. I think the problem that we have, too, as professors, and I'll admit this, is we've got ego problems. I mean, I think there are a lot of professors that deny that, but I think the more you deny it, the worse it becomes. And so, you know, a lot of people, and I think that same foreman thing is sort of, you're going to stoke your own ego, but I don't think that's fair to what we do. We teach, and I think, you know, we got to humble ourselves and just, you know, do the best we can for students and not be jealous that they become more than we do. I think, if anything, I'm proud of a lot of my students.
Yeah, I celebrate it.
Yeah, for sure. So, Matt, last question. What is one word that comes to your mind when you think of Chadron State?
Community. That's ever since I've been here, it's just there's such a strong sense of community amongst the students, amongst the faculty, really the whole town. I mean, you know, if something happens in town, you hear about it.
Everybody knows about it.
You know, and I think that's just an artifact of a lot of small towns. And I think
Yeah.
that makes us unique amongst the campuses. Because, yeah, we have some other small campuses, but we're really by far the most, both you know, we hear the term rural, but we're also remote.
Yeah.
And I think just the way that people are out here because of that. I mean, the sandhills, you know, people, you know, your car breaks down, you're sitting along the road. And part of it, they're checking you. They're just worried if you're messing around. But a lot of them, they'll check to make sure your car running. I mean, I do that to people too. It's just the way people are. Where I grew up in Milwaukee, your car breaks down along the road, you're just lucky people will run you over. You know? So it's just that sense of community out here is always, ever since I've been here, I love it.
Sure.
That's
Very
great.
good thing.
Well, thank you for joining us, Matt. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah. Good. I did, like I said, never did a podcast. Didn't know what to expect.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah,
Good
for
start
sure.
for it.
Yeah, it was fun.
Great.
You guys
Thank you.
You guys have had some great topics. I appreciate that.
Thank you.